great pleasure to be here, and thank you to the organisers for inviting me. I'm going to speak, hopefully if my slide will come back up, about the need for innovation in health law and governance. I think this has come up indirectly throughout this conference, that advances in personalised medicine and innovation from a biomedical perspective can't actually be realised without concurrent innovations and improvements in law and in governance. And I'm going to talk to you a bit about that just briefly, and I want to emphasise the importance of innovation in law in two ways: through the national health insurance laws that govern every jurisdiction, or most jurisdictions, and through the way that the courts are approaching rights to health, which are increasingly a common phenomenon around the world. So often we have this conflict, and we're seeing now in the developed world a very clear move from hospitals and physician-based care and into community-based care. And as our population is aging, they are having to cope with multiple chronic diseases, and our system has yet, however, to respond to change from a system that's focused on acute episodic care to care that is provided in home and community settings by a far greater range of providers. Most people, and research demonstrates this, view being displaced from their homes and daily life with family as a grave threat to their autonomy. And the care they may receive in overburdened institutions can be appalling from the standpoint of autonomy. For example, in my home province of Ontario, Canada, we hear reports of nursing homes where half the residents are routinely sedated with off-label antipsychotics, as an example. So this push to facilitating people's ability to live at homes and in their communities, drugs and devices need to be and can be better tailored to patients' needs to achieve patient autonomy and our goals of maximising choice and happiness at the ends of our life. But in the Canadian context, and I think this is a global problem, laws and governance structures hinder achieving this goal. So, for example, in Canada, prescription drugs are not part of the universal health insurance plan, meaning that many people, particularly low-income people, go without access to drugs. So I'm striking a little bit of a somber note here, hence the tattered Canadian flag. For Canada, at least, there's so much more work to be done to bring our universal system up to date in the late 20th century that it seems a little bit Pollyannish to get carried away with the promises of 21st century medicine. And to cite one particular example that research has just revealed, that approximately 1,000 lower income Canadians in Ontario die every year from want of access to insulin and other medicines for diabetes. God. 1,000 people a year, low income in Canada. So what do we do then? And part of the problem is the way that our national health insurance law is structured, and indeed how many national health insurance laws are structured. Apples are not compared with apples, and oranges aren't compared with oranges. Physician services and hospital services are given priority over diagnostics, medicines, care needed in community settings, and so forth. So we need a change. And what's interesting, you can actually avoid this slide, that's why they said don't lose slides, because you're looking at that. What's interesting here is that philosophers and lawyers, economists, health services researchers, we pretty much all agree that it's almost impossible to say for sure what is an essential basket of services that should be covered for everybody. Our needs change across culture, time, and space. But what we can say is that you should have a fair process. And what we mean by a fair process, a process that is transparent and largely evidence-driven. And that is what every system should aspire to, this kind of fair and just process. Because what is fair and just back in 1970 is not fair and just today in 2016, and will not be what is fair and just in 2050. Laws and governance and regulation needs to be more flexible and adaptable to kind of keep up with these changes, such that we are always rewarding new innovations that are effective and basically casting off things that are no longer as effective going forward. So our national health insurance laws need to change. They need to include the principle of this fair and just process. They need to be constantly revised, constantly reflective of what are our present needs and what is our capacity to meet these needs. And I can't emphasize how important this is on the global stage, as a number of middle-income countries like China, for example, are laying down new national health insurance laws. We don't want these countries to make the same mistakes that countries in the North have made. Now, my second point, I just want to move to the question of the right to health. And the right to health is a right that we have in international law, but it doesn't really become real until it transpires into domestic constitutions. And in this regard, it's interesting that we've seen a huge rise of the right to health, and now 70% of the world's constitutions include a right to health. And sometimes this is just aspirational talk. But in 40% of the world's constitutions, these rights are actually justiciable through the courts. All right? So we might think, well, this right to health might line up perfectly, perhaps, with new innovations coming down the pipeline to ensure that they get into the health systems, but unfortunately it doesn't always work like that, for better or for worse. So I'll just give you two quick examples as I wind up. The first is from South Africa. And the famous case from South Africa about the right to health is the Treatment Action Campaign case. Here, the South African Constitutional Court overturned then President Mbeki's refusal to allow the provision of Neprevin to prevent mother-to-child transmission, finding that this was completely unreasonable and irrational. However, since this famous case, the court has been very, very careful about wading in to second-guess government decision-making because of a concern around limited resources, one that is understandable. On the other hand, in Colombia, you have one of the most litigious societies in the world because the Constitutional Court has recognized this action called a tutela action, which is basically a cheap, easy way to bring your rights to court. And the right to health has been, through a tutela action, heard tens of thousands of times in Colombia. But the end result of this has actually been to challenge the very sustainability of the public healthcare system in Colombia. So we have to strike a balance here between being able to bring these things, bring new innovations into the public healthcare systems and insurance systems, while at the same time ensuring that we can maintain the sustainability. So this is a work that is in flux. How do we figure this out? And I just want to go back to the point that I made in the first piece of my talk about the need for fair process. I think the answer to the second part is that courts need to try to ensure that governments are following a fair process that takes account of the resources of the population, of culture, and of evidence. And then I think we can finally have that nirvana that we're aspiring to, of a fair and just system. Thank you.